Welcome back to another episode of the CopCast Chiefs Chat Edition. You can see I have a different co-host today. I have the Chief. You're elevated as co-host for us.
I've been promoted.
Congratulations.
Yeah, how's it feel? It feels good.
Yeah, so Mercedes is still on maternity leave. She's going to be back, don't worry. But the Chief is going to be my co-host today because we have a special guest. You might have just heard him. We have State Representative Mike Giallombardo with us today. And we wanted to kind of take a deeper dive into the next steps when it comes to how we address legislation and things like that. This is all born from a conversation that we had about the recent school threats, Chief.
Yeah, this is at the end of that episode, we talked about, just to recap for those who might not be aware, we had kind of an oddball case where there was a school threat where a individual made the threat verbally. It was videotaped and uploaded to social media by another individual. And the statute captures that activity, the posting of it, which resulted in the felony charge of a written or posted school threat. And the individual who made the comments did not meet the criteria for that charge. We were able to subsequently arrest him on a different charge, but the question was why? Why couldn't we arrest him for that? And the law is the law. And at the end of that episode, we said on next steps, we're going to engage the state representative for our community, which is Mike Giallombardo, that I have a relationship with. I talked to him that weekend and said, Mike, are you aware of what happened? You talk about a guy who's in tune locally. Yes, he is. He's from Cape Coral, like myself, a Mariner grad. He's got kids in school. So it was very front of mind for him. And he said, absolutely, I saw it. What can we do?
Right.
And that's where that partnership had already been there, but for this particular issue really went into action.
Well, it's nice to have these partnerships because now you can, not to say this in a negative way, but take advantage of it, right? This is where we can actually create some action to come from something like this. So thank you for coming today.
No, absolutely.
It is awesome to have you here. How you doing?
I'm doing well. First, I graduated from North.
Oh.
So I went to Mariner for 3 years, and I went to North for my senior year. So
well,
it's all right.
Mariners
for 3. Yeah.
They set you on the path.
Yeah, set me on a path. Right?
Exactly.
So,
That's awesome. Well, thank you for coming and for being part of this conversation, because I think it's important for a lot of people. It's crazy how much this really blew up and exploded here in Cape Coral. So many parents understandably concerned about this situation. So I think it's good to be talking about the next steps here for sure.
Well, I would say first, the statute came, I think it was 2021, where we passed a digital threats bill, right? If you make a threat over any type of social media, text message, anything like that, that is elevated to a felony. In this case, the individual who posted the threat is the one who transmitted that threat over a social media platform, and the individual that said something wasn't necessarily because they weren't the one that it wasn't their account that that posted. So there is a gap in the statute that we're hoping to address. Now, when you're looking at a bill, it's not just going up to Tallahassee and saying, "Hey, I want to submit this," and so you got to have a Senate sponsor, you got to have a House sponsor, and it goes through the committee process. So a bill like this would probably hit criminal justice, possibly hit criminal justice appropriations, and then the big judiciary committee before going to the House floor. It has to go through the same process in the Senate. So that Senate sponsors now got to push that bill all the way through. They may have different committee stops and then eventually go to their floor. And then sometimes the bills don't exactly align the exact same language. And sometimes, there's little tweaks that got to be made. And that's when the negotiation happens and saying, hey, which version are we going to take?
Right.
And then either we'll pass ours over or they'll pass theirs over, and then we'll take that up, and then once it passes, then it goes to the governor's desk.
And when you said ours and theirs, you're talking about the two different chambers of government, much like the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives. We have the same thing in the state of Florida, state Senate and state House. So you guys will do your bill, the Senate will do their bill. They jive. Some of the language will be congruent, some of it won't. You pick the best of the two, or the most that's going to pass. And those speed bumps, if you will, are intentional to take this case out of it, to keep emotion from letting something steamroll through that, oh, we didn't think about that, we didn't think about that, we were letting emotion drive the train, and then you get a law that really wasn't fully thought out and formulated.
Right.
So that's done on purpose.
Yeah, so I'll tell you this. So this year I passed a bill on large scale events, people just breaking and trespassing. It's a trespassing bill. It's really for large scale events, so 5,000 people or more. So if it's like a football game or a concert or something, and this was all in a response to the soccer games where everybody just trampled over all the law enforcement and just busted through the gates. Most of them didn't have tickets. And that bill, as it started, and we worked with Miami-Dade County Sheriff with that, way it ended up on the end was not the same, right? It went through a process. They looked at, juveniles at a county fair. What if they just jump the fence? We can't up that to a felony.
Right.
So they took all those things into account before it got to the final stop, because we wanted to make sure that we did our due diligence, we ran all the traps, and we don't have unintended consequences when we pass a piece of law.
So grown-ups getting paid to do grown-up things.
Correct.
Right? You got
What kind of grown-ups? Sometimes.
Yeah, politics, but
Yeah.
No, that's exactly right, because you don't want that. I remember that law. That was the Leo Messi law, that where everybody stormed
Yeah. Yep, that's it.
That guy's
The Messi law, yeah.
very not messy like a mess, but like
MESSI.
one of
Yes.
one of the greatest soccer players that caused
Yeah.
such an excitement that we now have legislation because of it.
Yeah, because it was all a misdemeanor, right?
Right.
Same thing with the gaming bill. I know we have these little arcades and casinos that pop up all over the place. They're illegal. And so we had a gambling bill that addressed a number of things, but it did say that essentially it was a felony if you were a manager of any one of those establishments. Because it's a misdemeanor, it's very difficult for law enforcement to be able to enforce that, and to, if it's a misdemeanor, storing all the arcade equipment, if you seize it all, there's a lot of cost that goes into those things.
Right.
So in order for us to kind of shepherd this piece of legislation through, had to go through my committee, which I chair the Industries and Professional Activities, and it had to go through criminal justice. So there was a process that it had to go through. I mean, the way it started is not even close to the way it ended, just because of all the tweaks and all the things that you have to, flush out. And we have a great staff in Tallahassee that'll go through and rooms of lawyers that just kind of comb through the legislation to make sure that we're not violating constitutional issues. And when the bill passes, it doesn't, our goal is to not prevent it from having to go to the Supreme Court and go through the whole process.
Right.
So, so there's a lot of due diligence that goes in these bills.
And because of those different committees, there's a different lens to look at one particular problem. So you talk about a business lens, you think you have all of it figured out, and then you take what you have and you give it to the law enforcement side, and they're like, well, wait a second, there's X, Y, Z, or the other way around, right? Where if it was police driven, these are all the things that make our life easier to do this. And then, well, wait a minute, there's a lot of business components that you're not aware of, and you have to put those together to make a solid piece of legislation.
Yeah, there's a great example is there was a piece of legislation that the state attorneys were really, really working on, and there is an issue. We just got the solution that the bill, it's a social media bill that was proposed is not necessarily the business friendly way to do it, and it could cause a lot of unintended consequences. Essentially, getting rid of end-to-end encryption. So that could pose a whole other issue when it comes to cybersecurity, privacy, all those different things. And I get the intent is great. Like, they want to make sure that kids that are on social media, parents have access, law enforcement has access. But the bill was initially just to end end-to-end encryption, and that is next to impossible for a platform or
that's a multi-billion-dollar business model for a lot of people, and you're trying to create legislation to end that, and that's not going to work.
To their credit, they're I mean, I've had great conversations. We have an amazing state attorney, Amira Fox.
Yes.
And we talked extensively about this, and next year I'm hopeful that we're gonna put something together to kind of get something through that helps safeguard. And sometimes legislation doesn't make it through the process and it takes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years to actually get through because of just all the complexity of it. I mean, sometimes it's really uprooting a massive, lots of industry, a lot of changes
Right.
that really have to be vetted out very carefully.
So on a visual, you think of legislation in Tallahassee as one big gear wheel, but really inside of it, there's a lot of different gears that are spinning.
Oh, yeah.
And they all have to align for a bill to pass. So if we circle back to the one we're talking about with the cyber threat that was posted, it's not as simple as, hey, wait a second, that doesn't make sense. Let's get up there and just get this through. There's a lot of different
Hurdles.
levers and hurdles that it would have to go. So an example would be a kid, right? Not a grown man that we're talking about in this case, but a kid is 15, his brain isn't fully developed, says something stupid.
Happens all the time.
It happens to get witnessed by somebody. Somebody else is on their phone filming, and I'm filming over here, and I pick you up saying something stupid. If we're not careful, the intention isn't for you to go to jail for saying something stupid with a major felony. We have to make sure that those things are vetted out.
Right.
Yes, and and then how do you differentiate the case that happened, with the adult just recently at the school or regarding the school, and then how do you differentiate that between a kid just being so angry they don't know how to express themselves, but other than say something dumb,
Right.
and so and that's because I brought this up to judiciary when we had the conversation, and that was the concern. Like, hey, well, what happens if a 10-year-old kid just said something stupid, right?
Which happens often.
What happens? I have 3 kids that and so then what do you do, right? You can't just go and say, oh, well, it's automatically felony done, right? Or so you have to be really careful on how you do this. Otherwise, you're causing way more damage long term for people's lives, than any good. So
there's a lot of nuance to it, which is why the gap is there to begin with. I'm sure it's, there's so many different scenarios, and trying to find a piece of legislation that covers all of it, but not overextending, you know.
Very smart, well-intended people wrote this law when it first came out. They didn't just, without thought do it, but it's impossible to envision every scenario that would come up. And there are times like this where it falls outside and it is a gap. But that's why we're doing what we're doing. So if to differentiate between a 10-year-old doing 10-year-old things and a 25-year-old man with a very specific location, date, method, I think that there's some work in there.
Yep.
And that's what we're doing right now. And we started long before this blew up, we were having these conversations. So I think that's one of the main takeaways I have, is that this is what your government in action looks like. You have people that are entrusted, like myself, to run the police department, and I'm accountable to safety in this community. And when it's out of my purview, you don't just quit. You find the people that will help pick up the baton and work with them, and that's what we're doing here.
Yeah, and if you look at like the digital threats bill that passed a few years back, that this other kid that uploaded it essentially got in trouble for, I mean, it's pretty clear. I mean, you have to think about it, take it, and post it, right? So that was very easy to say, hey, this comes under the digital threat. You took the action to say, I'm gonna take the next step and post this thing.
Right.
So that's a little easier. But when somebody's just anger, there's emotion or something, and says something, then you're like, all right, now is that like real? And I talked to some of the SROs and I mean, they do a great job. And a lot of them, they said probably 90% of the things that kids say is out of stupidity.
Right.
Right.
And this is a new one in that it's a tag team effort, the legislation. And when you close your eyes and envision a threat or envision what this law was for, it's a sole operator.
Right.
Formulated the thought, posted the thought, or communicated the thought in some digital fashion and did it. It's all encompassing. That's what it was intended for. That's easy. That's the majority of these cases. But you get these oddballs that happen like this, and we can't just wash our hands of it. We've got to find a way to do it, but it's got to be balanced with common sense.
And I think, maybe also taking the approach is, a specific action, right? Like, they say they're gonna take their, AK-47 or AR or whatever and do X, Y, and Z to X, Y, and Z, right? Like that is a specific action. There was some thought behind it,
Right.
So maybe addressing that. And that's the conversations that we had in Tallahassee, kind of figuring out what's the balance between, a kid just one-off saying something dumb to, somebody's actually saying what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, and when they're going to do it, which is very specific and thoughtful.
That's what's comforting to me on many levels as the chief of police, that we identified a problem, we work with the legislature, and we're moving. That professionally, that's comforting for me that
Right.
we're moving. As a resident of the city, take my profession out of it, I'm comforted to know that the people that are elected to represent me and my family are doing that action. And then as a parent with somebody, a child in the schools here, to know that they're doing that to protect our kids, I'm very comforted by that. So.
Yeah, and we do that with, I get a lot of other, the building industry, people at school, like they always come up and talk to me about different ideas or thoughts and, sometimes we'll take that and figure out if it's got legs and if there's something that really needs to be done, or if sometimes it's just a one-off, right? And can't respond and create more words on a page for
Right.
just one-off situations.
Exactly.
So, but
So
we got to make sure and be thoughtful, and I don't like creating unnecessary laws.
Right, because then it gums up the works and it's never going to be enforced, or it's more of an emotional response instead of a tactical response. But
And it gets in the way of other things that have a chance getting done because it's bogging down the system.
You're absolutely, and that happens a lot, actually. Yes, people have take an emotional bill, they file an emotional bill, but normally by the time it gets to the end, it's no longer emotional, right? There's a lot of folks that weren't tied to that situation, or that are kind of going through it and saying, okay, we got to change this. We got to I get the issue. We got to tweak this, to make it actual, something that could be, enforced, or, does it have a huge fiscal impact?
right, kind of a professional way of going, what are we doing here? Right?
That's right.
You need somebody at the end to go, wait, what are we doing here?
Yep. What's the intent? What are you trying to achieve? And maybe this is not the way to do it, right?
Yep.
And that happens a lot. And then fiscal impact. Last year we did the state's budget was like 116 billion. We're proposing 113 now as the House. We're trying to drop that budget down. Florida's been good for many years. We don't need to keep increasing spending. So we're trying to pull back on a lot of the spending. And so when we look at these bills that come through, some of these bills, we had a bill that was coming through my committee, and ultimately I didn't hear it. It had a $16 million fiscal impact.
Yeah, nothing's free.
Nothing's free. So I knew that so I told the bill sponsor, I said, hey, if you got to get rid of this fiscal impact. We can't go and just pass a bunch of bills that have these huge financial, burdens to the state. So they went back and they tried, and there was just no way to cut out the fiscal impact. And I said, well, then you go, what's the intent? What's the goal that you're trying to, what are you trying to fix? In this case, it was, with animals and stuff. So I said, well, if this is what you're trying to achieve, let's figure out another way to do that.
There may be something already in place.
Correct.
Right.
Figuring out another path to get there, without causing a $16 million impact to, I think the impact would have been to Commissioner of Agriculture. So it's you got to look at all those things in place. And I have a personal rule: if the bill has more than $500,000 in a fiscal, I'm going to take a little bit closer look and figure out why. Right. So you got to, all those things are part of the equation.
So end result and goal will always trump process. Right?
Yes.
We're driven by the end result more than the process.
And sometimes
if the process takes over and it overtakes the end goal, we're upside down here. What are we doing?
Yeah. And sometimes the bill will make it through one committee, two committees, and it'll stop, because normally a bill will have to go through a sub. and then it'll have to possibly go through an appropriations committee. And each committee, each one of those subs probably have around 17, 18 people on it. The big committees, which is Commerce, Judiciary, State Affairs, would have about 24, 25 people. So there's more people on it. There's 120 members in the House total and 40 in the Senate. And, once it goes to those committees, usually, I've seen bills after the budget committee stop, or if it gets to that big committee, Commerce or State Affairs, it just won't get passed. It just won't move through.
Right.
A
stalled bill.
It's stalled, right? For whatever reason. So, and we usually try to let the members know, hey, this is why we're not going to hear it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So a couple of takeaways that I get from that, very educational, first of all. And I knew a little bit about the legislature and that process, but I still learned. Very informative for our viewers. But this particular one that we're talking about with the school threat, this does have merit. There is a winnable path. We're already moving towards that. We can't guarantee anything on the end after hearing everything, but we are moving forward. And here's some inside baseball for people that maybe don't know about Mike G. We've had a relationship for years. We work through Ian together and all kinds of different legislative sessions. And Mike calls me 10 to 1 than I call him. And the calls that Mike gives me are, what do you need? What can I do for you? What will benefit you here for our work in Tallahassee? He's always doing hometown servant stewardship for us. And I feel bad because, like, Mike, we're good. We're moving. And I hate that it was this particular case, but I went, I know who to call. And I finally get to call him instead. And what was really great about it wasn't, oh man, I call you all the time because, politics stuff. Absolutely not. It was right away, man. Number one, I know about it. I saw it. I'm invested in it. Let's go. And that was something.
Well, I appreciate that. And again, that's my job, right? That's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to, respond. But I get more calls from other areas of the state, asking for stuff than I do from home. So it's, but it's good. You're resourceful. You only ask when you need something, and that's good. And that's noted. So we appreciate that.
We appreciate you doing all this and coming here to have this conversation today. I know you're a busy guy, so coming all the way to the Cape Coral Police Department, Cape CopCast, checking out our podcast studio. We appreciate it.
No,
for sure.
Thank you for having me.
When do you go back?
I don't know. We haven't. So we extended session because we have not finalized the budget yet. We're still in negotiations with the Senate. I'm hopeful. I think we'll be back at some point next week to start going through, we call it conferencing. So we take, we have a framework right now of kind of an idea of where we're going to agree on when it comes to the budget with the Senate. And now it's just line by line saying, okay, what about this? What about that? How much money we want to put to that? So healthcare is by far the largest chunk of the state's budget. And schools are right around second. But we'll start going through and figuring out places to cut. It's interesting when you start going through that process and you see some of these agencies and they ask for money and they ask for lots of money, and you start to look at places where, like, can we cut here? Can we cut there? Can we cut there? And ultimately, we're looking at large tax cuts for the state. So we're trying to figure out how do we reduce the budget. We've been, the budget's been large, $117 billion last year. Let's try to reduce it. So that's what we're going to be doing just moving forward. And some of these bills that were attached to a budget, kind of like what I said, some of the bills do have huge fiscal impacts, $100, $200, $300 million. So, and most of them are education and healthcare bills, things like that. But we will go in and start negotiating on all those parts. So I think we'll be good.
It's hard work, man.
Yeah, seriously.
But I appreciate it because it's a it's difficult. These are some things are very important to people, and then fiscal relief, especially now. It's very important for Floridians and Southwest Floridians especially. So
for sure,
we're grateful.
Yeah, no,
Absolutely.
happy to do it.
Well, thank you guys so much. And we will catch you next time. Have a good one.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Cape CopCast, where we dive into the heart of the Cape Coral Police Department's safety initiatives, community relations, and the insightful stories of different officers that make up our department.
Please like and share our podcast. If you have feedback, you can email capepdpao@capecoral.gov. And remember to follow us on social media. Our handle is @CapePD on all major platforms. Stay safe, stay Cape.